Sarah traced her fingers along the dusty surface of the antique music box, its once gleaming brass, now tarnished by decades of neglect. The attic of her grandmother's Victorian house held countless treasures, but this particular item made her pause. The delicate filigree work around its edges told stories of craftsmanship from another era, while the small key, still attached by a faded ribbon, promised secrets waiting to be unveiled. As she turned the key, the mechanism resisted at first, years of stillness making it stubborn. Then, with a gentle click, it yielded. The lid opened slowly, revealing a miniature ballerina frozen mid-pirouette. But instead of the expected tinkling melody, a different sound emerged, the soft rustle of paper falling to the wooden floorboards. Sarah picked up the yellowed envelope, her heart quickening at the sight of her grandmother's distinctive handwriting. To be opened only when the truth can no longer hurt, it read. The words sent a chill down her spine, despite the summer heat that made the attic almost unbearable. She had always known her grandmother, Eleanor Mitchell, as the pillar of their small community in Millbrook, the respected librarian, the caring neighbor, the woman who never turned away anyone in need. But the weight of this envelope in her hands suggested there was more to the story, depths to Eleanor's life that had remained hidden beneath her carefully maintained facade. The letter inside was dated September 15th, 1962, and as Sarah began to read, the world around her seemed to fade away, replaced by the vivid images her grandmother's words painted of a different time, a different world. My dearest grandchild, the letter began, by the time you read this, I will be gone, and the truth I've carried for so long can finally be set free. It began in the summer of 1943, when I was not much older than you are now. The story that unfolded through Eleanor's elegant script spoke of love and betrayal, of choices made in desperate times, and of secrets that had shaped not just her life, but the lives of everyone in Millbrook. As Sarah read about the mysterious disappearance of Thomas Crawford, the wealthy industrialist who had owned half the town, she began to understand why her grandmother had chosen silence for so many years. Eleanor's account detailed her work as Crawford's secretary, the late nights at the office as they prepared for what he called the deal of the century. She described the gradual discovery of discrepancies in the books, the realization that Crawford had been embezzling from his own workers' pension fund, and the moral dilemma that followed. The letter revealed how Eleanor had confronted Crawford that fateful night in his office. The same night, he vanished without a trace. The police had questioned everyone, but no one ever suspected the quiet, efficient secretary who kept the office running smoothly even in her employer's absence. Sarah's hands trembled as she read about the money, how Crawford had offered Eleanor a share of his ill-gotten gains in exchange for her silence, and how she had instead used his own careful bookkeeping against him. Through a complex series of transactions, she had managed to restore the stolen funds to the pension account while creating a paper trail that led nowhere. The story grew more intricate as Eleanor described the years that followed. She wrote of sleepless nights spent wondering if someone would discover her role in Crawford's disappearance, of the careful way she had built her reputation in the community as a shield against suspicion. The letter spoke of her marriage to Sarah's grandfather, a kind man who never questioned why his wife sometimes woke screaming from nightmares she refused to discuss. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the attic's dusty windows, Sarah reached the final pages. Her grandmother's words took on a new urgency as she explained why she had chosen this moment to reveal her secret. The truth is, my darling, that Thomas Crawford didn't disappear that night. He died. Not by my hand, but by his own miscalculation. When I confronted him, he tried to flee through the private entrance behind his office, the one that led to the old service tunnels beneath the building. In his haste, he fell. I found him at the bottom of those stairs, his neck broken, his eyes staring sightlessly up at me. Eleanor went on to describe how she had sealed the tunnel entrance, using her knowledge of the building's architecture to ensure it would never be found. The official story became one of disappearance, of a wealthy man abandoning his responsibilities, rather than the truth of a desperate accident and a young woman's choice to protect not just herself, but the entire community from scandal. The letter continued, revealing how Eleanor had spent the following decades ensuring that Crawford's victims, The workers whose pensions he had nearly stolen received what they were owed. She had used her position as town librarian to monitor the ripple effects of her actions, watching as families prospered instead of falling into poverty, as children went to college on the pensions that might have vanished. Sarah sat back, the last page of the letter resting in her lap, as she tried to process everything she had learned. The attic around her seemed different now, filled with the weight of history and the echoes of choices made long ago. The setting sun painted the room in shades of amber and shadow, much like the moral complexities her grandmother had navigated throughout her life. A soft knock at the attic door startled her. "Sarah, are you still up there?" It was her mother's voice, concerned and curious. "I've made dinner." "Coming, Mom," Sarah called back, carefully folding the letter and returning it to its envelope. As she placed it back in the music box, she noticed something she had missed before, a small compartment beneath the ballerina, containing a key she didn't recognize and a series of numbers written in her grandmother's hand. She closed the music box, knowing that her grandmother's story wasn't finished. There were more secrets to uncover, more truths waiting to be revealed. But for now, she needed time to consider what she had learned about the woman who had shaped not just her family's destiny, but the fate of an entire town. As Sarah descended the attic stairs, she carried with her not just the weight of knowledge, but the understanding that sometimes the greatest acts of justice were the mask of silence. Her grandmother's careful orchestration of consequences and redemption had created a legacy far more complex than anyone could have imagined. The kitchen below was warm and bright, filled with the comforting sense of her mother's cooking. Sarah took her usual place at the table, watching as her mother moved efficiently around the space, so much like Eleanor in her quiet competence. She wondered what other secrets might be hidden in the walls of this old house. What other stories waited to be discovered? The evening settled around them as they shared their meal, the routine of family dinner providing a gentle counterpoint to the revelations of the afternoon. Sarah found herself studying her mother's face, searching for traces of Eleanor, wondering if she too carried secrets beneath her composed exterior. Later that night, as Sarah lay in bed, her mind returned to the key and numbers hidden in the music box. Tomorrow, she would begin her own investigation, following the trail her grandmother had left. But for now, she let herself drift into dreams filled with the echoes of the past, where truth and silence danced an eternal waltz in the shadows of memory. The next morning dawned clear and bright, carrying with it the promise of discovery. Sarah dressed quickly, her mind already racing with possibilities. The key from the music box felt heavy in her pocket, a tangible link to the mysteries that still remained. As she made her way downstairs, she could hear the town beginning to wake around her, unaware that their shared history was about to reveal another layer of its complex tapestry. The morning light streamed through the stained glass windows of the foyer, casting colorful patterns on the hardwood floors. Sarah paused to study them, thinking about how light and shadow, truth and secrets, were always dancing together in this house. She pulled out her grandmother's key, turning it over in her hands as she considered her next move. The numbers from the music box seemed to burn in her mind. 42-17-89. They had the familiar pattern of a combination lock. But to what? Sarah had spent half the night cataloging every lockbox and safe she knew of in the house, but none seemed quite right. Her grandmother's letter suggested that there was more to the story, more proof of her careful manipulation of events all those years ago. As Sarah stood in the morning light, contemplating her next move, she heard the distant whistle of the train passing through Millbrook. The sound triggered a memory, her grandmother mentioning the old bank building where she had worked with Crawford. The building still stood downtown, though it had been converted into offices years ago. Sarah grabbed her car keys, suddenly certain about where she needed to go next. The drive downtown took only minutes, but it felt like crossing decades. The streets of Millbrook had changed little since her grandmother's time. The same brick buildings lining Main Street, the same towering oaks providing shade for the sidewalks. Sarah parked in front of the old bank building, its limestone facade still impressive after all these years. Inside, the grand banking hall had been divided into modern office spaces, but much of the original architecture remained. Sarah approached the security guard at the front desk, her heart pounding. "I'm here about a safety deposit box," she said, showing him the key. "It belonged to my grandmother, Eleanor Mitchell." The guard's eyes widened slightly at the name. "Miss Mitchell?" "Of course. The bank's old vault is still intact in the basement. We use it for storage now. Let me call Mrs. Henderson from the management office. She'll know more about the old safety deposit boxes." While she waited, Sarah studied the building's interior, trying to imagine it as it had been in 1943. Somewhere in this building, Thomas Crawford had met his end, and her grandmother had begun her decades-long mission of secret redemption. The marble floors still held echoes of countless footsteps, each one carrying its own story, its own secrets. Mrs. Henderson arrived quickly, a slim woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a professional manner. "Eleanor Mitchell's granddaughter? How wonderful. Your grandmother was a remarkable woman." She led Sarah toward the basement stairs. "We've maintained some of the old safety deposit boxes for historical reasons. If you have the key and the combination, we should be able to help you." The vault in the basement was like stepping back in time. The massive steel door stood open, revealing rows of safety deposit boxes that lined the walls. Mrs. Henderson guided Sarah to a section near the back, where the older boxes were kept. The numbers on Sarah's key matched a box at eye level. With trembling fingers, Sarah inserted the key and entered the combination. The lock turned smoothly, as if it had been waiting all these years for this moment. Inside the box was another envelope, thicker than the first, and a small leather-bound notebook. "I'll give you some privacy," Mrs. Henderson said, stepping away. Sarah opened the envelope first. Inside were documents, detailed records of financial transactions, carefully annotated in her grandmother's precise handwriting. The notebook contained dates, names, and amounts, telling the story of how Eleanor had tracked every dollar Crawford had stolen and ensured it found its way back to its rightful owners. But there was something else, too. Photographs, newspaper clippings, and letters that revealed an even deeper layer to the story. As Sarah began to read, she realized that her grandmother's tale of justice and redemption was far more intricate than she had imagined. The truth that had waited so patiently in this vault was about to change everything she thought she knew about her family, her town, and the true price of silence. The documents revealed that Crawford's scheme had been part of a larger conspiracy, one that had threatened to destroy not just the workers' pensions, but the entire economic foundation of Millbrook. Eleanor's careful manipulation of events had protected not just individuals, but the very future of the community itself. As Sarah pieced together this new chapter of the story, she began to understand the true weight of her grandmother's legacy. Eleanor Mitchell hadn't just been a keeper of secrets. She had been a guardian of justice, working in the shadows to right wrongs that could never be addressed in the light of day. The morning stretched into afternoon as Sarah sat in the vault, surrounded by the proof of her grandmother's extraordinary life. Outside, Millbrook continued its daily routine, unaware that within these steel walls, another piece of its hidden history was finally coming to light. Each document she examined added another layer to her understanding, revealing how Eleanor had orchestrated a delicate balance between truth and consequence, between justice and mercy. The story that emerged was one of remarkable courage and intelligence, of a woman who had chosen to carry the burden of knowledge so that others might live in peace. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the basement windows, Sarah carefully packed away the documents she had discovered. She had decisions to make now, choices about how to honor her grandmother's legacy while ensuring that the truth served its proper purpose. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders, a familiar weight that seemed to echo through generations. Leaving the bank building, Sarah paused on the steps, looking out over the town that her grandmother had protected for so long. The evening light painted the brick buildings in shades of gold and shadow, much like the moral complexity of the story she now carried. She understood now why Eleanor had chosen this moment for the truth to emerge. The time had come for the silence to end, but in a way that would preserve the good that had grown from it. Sarah began walking home, her mind already forming plans for what would come next. The story wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But now she knew that sometimes the greatest acts of justice require not grand gestures or public declarations, but the patient, careful work of those who understand that truth, like light, must sometimes be revealed gradually to avoid burning too bright. The streets of Millbrook seemed different now, each familiar sight holding new meaning. Sarah could see her grandmother's influence everywhere. In the prosperous businesses, in the well-maintained homes, in the faces of families who had benefited from Eleanor's secret work without ever knowing it. As she reached her front porch, the last rays of sunlight catching the stained glass of the front door, Sarah felt a profound sense of peace. She had inherited more than just a story or a responsibility. She had inherited a legacy of wisdom, courage, and the understanding that true justice sometimes wears unexpected masks. The house welcomed her back, its familiar rooms now holding new mysteries to explore, new truths to uncover. But for now, Sarah simply sat in her grandmother's favorite chair, watching the day fade into evening, knowing that sometimes the most important stories are the ones that wait patiently in the shadows, ready to emerge when the time is right. In the quiet of the gathering dusk, Sarah began to write her own account of what she had discovered, adding her words to the symphony of silence and revelation that her grandmother had composed so many years ago. The story would continue, as all true stories do, finding its way through time in its own perfect rhythm. As Sarah's pen moved across the pages of her journal, recording the day's discoveries, a soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Her mother stood in the doorway, holding a steaming cup of tea. The familiar scent of Earl Grey, Eleanor's favorite, filled the room with memories. "You've been quiet since you got back," her mother said, setting the cup on the side table. "Did you find what you were looking for at the bank?" Sarah studied her mother's face, wondering how much she knew, how much Eleanor had shared with her own daughter. The weight of multiple generations' secrets pressed against her chest. "Mom, did Grandma ever talk to you about her time working at the old bank? About Thomas Crawford?" The subtle shift in her mother's expression, a flicker of recognition quickly masked, told Sarah everything. "She mentioned him once," her mother said slowly, settling into the chair opposite Sarah. "On her last night, actually, she was feverish, and I thought she was just confused, but—" She trailed off, her fingers tracing patterns on the armrest. "Tell me," Sarah urged gently, reaching for her notebook. Her mother's story spilled out like water from a broken dam. Eleanor had indeed confided in her daughter during those final hours, sharing fragments of the truth she'd carried for so long. But the version her mother knew was incomplete, colored by delirium and the constraints of time. As Sarah listened, she began to understand that her grandmother's web of secrets extended even further than the documents in the vault had suggested. Eleanor had protected not just the town's financial future, but its very soul. The stories her mother shared revealed how Eleanor had used her position as librarian to guide and influence countless lives, steering young people toward opportunities, helping families avoid financial pitfalls, all while maintaining her facade of quiet competence. The night deepened around them as they talked, mother and daughter piecing together the puzzle of Eleanor's life. Sarah shared what she had discovered in the vault, the careful records, the strategic moves that had preserved Millbrook's future. Her mother's eyes widened at the scope of Eleanor's actions, the intricate dance of justice and mercy she had choreographed over decades. "There's something else," her mother said finally, rising from her chair. "Something I've kept in my closet since she passed." She returned moments later with a small wooden box, its surface worn smooth by time. Inside was a collection of letters, each dated and arranged chronologically, spanning the years from 1943 to just weeks before Eleanor's death. The letters were addressed to Sarah's grandfather, written but never sent. They told the story of their courtship, their marriage, and the weight of secrets between them. Eleanor had loved him deeply, but had never been able to share the full truth of her past. Instead, she had poured her confessions onto these pages, creating a parallel narrative of their life together. As Sarah read through the letters, new dimensions of her grandmother's story emerged. Eleanor had struggled with her choices, questioned her actions, but ultimately remained convinced that her path of secret justice was the only way to protect both the truth and the people she loved. The letters revealed connections Sarah hadn't seen before. Names mentioned in the bank documents appeared in Eleanor's personal writings, showing how she had watched over the families affected by Crawford's schemes, ensuring that subsequent generations would have the opportunities their parents had almost lost. Dawn was breaking by the time Sarah and her mother finished reading the last letter. The early morning light painted the room in soft pastels, EU day emerging from the long night of revelations. They sat in comfortable silence, each processing the weight of what they had learned. "What will you do with all of this?" her mother asked finally, gesturing to the collection of documents, letters, and memories spread around them. Sarah considered the question carefully. The truth her grandmother had protected for so long had served its purpose, ensuring justice while preserving the community's faith in itself. But times had changed, and perhaps the full story could now serve a different purpose. She began gathering the papers, organizing them with the same careful precision her grandmother had shown in her record-keeping. "I think," she said slowly, "that it's time for a different kind of truth. Not an exposé or a scandal, but a story about justice, about the quiet heroism of someone who chose to carry a burden so others wouldn't have to." Her mother nodded, understanding blooming in her eyes. Eleanor always said that stories have their own time to be told. Maybe she knew that someday, someone would need to hear this one. As they worked together to organize Eleanor's legacy, Sarah felt a deep connection to her grandmother's mission. The truth she had discovered wasn't just about past events. It was a living thing, still shaping the present and future of Millbrook through the ripples of Eleanor's actions. The morning light strengthened, highlighting dust motes dancing in the air like particles of memory. Sarah opened her laptop and began to write, transforming the fragments of Eleanor's life into a coherent narrative. She would tell the story not as a confession or a revelation of wrongdoing, but as a testament to the power of principled action, of justice served through patience and wisdom rather than force. Her fingers moved across the keyboard, weaving together the threads of Eleanor's life. The public librarian and the secret keeper, the devoted wife and the guardian of justice, the grandmother who had understood that some truths need time to mature before they can be shared. Outside, Millbrook was waking up, its streets filling with people going about their daily lives, unknowing participants in the legacy Eleanor had preserved. Sarah paused in her writing to watch them pass by the window. Children heading to school, shopkeepers opening their businesses, elderly couples taking their morning walks. Each of them, in some way, had been touched by Eleanor's careful orchestration of consequences and opportunities. The story grew under her hands, not just a recounting of past events, but a bridge between generations, a testament to the power of quiet determination and the complicated nature of truth and justice. Sarah wrote through the morning and into the afternoon, stopping only when her mother brought her lunch and fresh tea. As the day progressed, Sarah began to understand that she wasn't just recording history. She was becoming part of it. Eleanor had passed her the key not just to unlock old secrets, but to continue the work of protecting and nurturing the community she had loved so well. The sun was setting again by the time Sarah wrote the final words of her first draft. The story wasn't finished. It might never be truly finished, but she had captured its essence, the delicate balance between truth and consequence that her grandmother had maintained for so long. She saved the document and closed her laptop, feeling both drained and energized. Tomorrow, she would begin the process of sharing Eleanor's story with the world, carefully and thoughtfully, just as her grandmother would have wanted. But for now, she sat in the gathering dusk, listening to the quiet sounds of her family's home, feeling the presence of generations of strong women who had shaped their world through wisdom, courage, and the judicious use of silence. The legacy of Eleanor Mitchell would continue, not as a burden of secrets, but as an inspiration for those who understood that sometimes the greatest acts of justice require not dramatic gestures, but patient, careful tending of truth's garden, allowing it to bloom in its own perfect time. As the evening shadows lengthened across Sarah's desk, her fingers hovered over the keyboard, contemplating Eleanor's legacy. In the soft glow of her desk lamp, she began to write again, determined to capture the next chapter of this unfolding story. The truth, like a carefully tended garden, needed constant nurturing to flourish. The following weeks transformed Millbrook in subtle but significant ways. Sarah's careful revelation of Eleanor's story, published first as a series of articles in the local newspaper, then expanding into a book, rippled through the community like waves in a still pond. Rather than the scandal some might have expected, the truth of Eleanor Mitchell's secret work inspired a renaissance of community spirit. Former families of mill workers, now successful business owners and professionals, began sharing their own stories. Tales emerged of mysterious scholarships that had appeared just when needed, of timely business advice that had saved struggling enterprises, of small kindnesses that had snowballed into life-changing opportunities. Each story traced back to Eleanor's quiet influence, her invisible hand guiding the town's destiny. The old bank building, its vault still holding echoes of Eleanor's work, became a museum dedicated to Millbrook's history. Sarah donated copies of her grandmother's records, carefully curated to protect individual privacy while preserving the essence of her mission. Visitors could trace the intricate web of financial transactions that had saved the town's future, marvel at the dedication of one woman who had chosen justice over acclaim. Sarah's mother discovered more of Eleanor's letters hidden throughout the house, each one revealing new facets of her mother's character. Some spoke of doubts and fears, of nights spent questioning her choices, of the weight of silence pressing against her conscience. Others celebrated small victories, a family rising from poverty, a child achieving their dreams, a wrong quietly righted without fanfare or recognition. The town council, inspired by Eleanor's example, established a foundation in her name, dedicated to continuing her work of quiet philanthropy. Sarah found herself appointed to its board, along with representatives from families whose lives had been touched by her grandmother's actions. Together, they worked to identify needs within the community, to offer help that empowered rather than embarrassed, to create opportunities that could transform lives. On warm evenings, Sarah often sat in her grandmother's garden, watching butterflies dance among the flowers Eleanor had planted decades ago. The garden, like the town itself, had flourished under patient, careful tending. New blooms appeared alongside established plants, creating a harmony of color and form that seemed to echo the interweaving of past and present in Millbrook's story. The old music box sat on Sarah's desk now, its mechanism restored to perfect working order. Sometimes, late at night, she would wind it up and listen to its melody, imagining her grandmother sitting in this same spot, planning her next careful move in the intricate game of justice she had played for so long. Eleanor's influence extended beyond Millbrook's borders as Sarah's book gained national attention. Other communities reached out, sharing similar stories of unsung heroes who had shaped their town's destinies through quiet, persistent action. A network began to form, connecting people who believed in the power of patient justice, of truth revealed in its proper time. Sarah's research led her to discover similar patterns in other towns during the post-war period. Other women like Eleanor who had worked behind the scenes to protect their communities from corruption and exploitation. She began documenting these stories too, weaving them into a larger narrative about the power of individual action and the importance of moral courage. The Mitchell House became a gathering place for people seeking to understand and continue Eleanor's work. Sarah hosted weekly meetings where community members could share concerns and ideas, working together to address modern challenges with the same thoughtful approach her grandmother had employed. On the anniversary of Eleanor's passing, the town gathered in the library she had managed for so many years. People shared memories, not just of the kind librarian they had known, but of the subtle ways she had influenced their lives, the doors she had quietly opened, the opportunities she had created. The library board unveiled a portrait of Eleanor, her gentle smile now watching over the space where she had done so much of her secret work. Sarah continued to write, documenting not just the past, but the ongoing impact of her grandmother's legacy. She saw Eleanor's influence in the way people approach problems, in their willingness to look beyond quick fixes to find lasting solutions, in their understanding that true justice sometimes required patience and discretion. The autumn leaves were turning when Sarah received a letter from a small town in another state. The writer, an elderly man, had worked with Eleanor briefly in the 1950s. He shared his own story of how she had helped him expose corruption in his community while protecting vulnerable people from retribution. His letter ended with a simple truth. Your grandmother understood that justice isn't just about revealing wrongdoing, it's about making things right. As winter approached, Sarah began working on a new project, inspired by the growing collection of stories about Eleanor's impact. She envisioned a network of community foundations, each dedicated to carrying forward the principles her grandmother had embodied: careful stewardship, quiet assistance, and the patient nurturing of justice. The music box still played its melody, but now it seemed less melancholy, more like a celebration of secrets transformed into shared wisdom. Eleanor's garden continued to bloom, tended now by Sarah and her mother, its flowers a living testament to the beauty that grows from careful cultivation. In the end, Sarah realized her grandmother's greatest legacy wasn't just the lives she had changed or the wrongs she had righted. It was the understanding that true justice, like a garden, requires both wisdom and patience, the courage to act when necessary, and the discretion to let truth emerge in its own perfect time. The story continued to unfold, each chapter revealing new depths to Eleanor's wisdom, new ways her influence had shaped not just the town, but the very nature of justice itself. As Eleanor's legacy continued to flourish, Sarah found herself drawn deeper into the intricate web of stories that surrounded her grandmother's work. The understanding that true justice required both wisdom and patience became the foundation for a new chapter in Millbrook's history. The town's transformation had only just begun, and with each passing day, new layers of Eleanor's influence emerged from the shadows of the past. The foundation established in Eleanor's name grew beyond its initial scope, attracting attention from social justice advocates and community organizers nationwide. They saw in Eleanor's methods a blueprint for sustainable change, not through dramatic confrontations or public exposures, but through careful, strategic action that protected the vulnerable while addressing systemic inequities. Sarah's research expanded as more stories came to light. She discovered a network of correspondence between Eleanor and other like-minded individuals across the country, each working in their own communities to right wrongs and protect the powerless. These letters, yellowed with age but sharp with purpose, revealed a sophisticated underground network of mutual aid and support that had operated for decades beneath the surface of American society. The Mitchell House became more than just a family home. It transformed into a living archive of social justice work. Sarah converted the attic where she had first discovered the music box into a research center, where scholars and activists could study Eleanor's methods and apply them to contemporary challenges. The rooms that had once held secrets now buzzed with energy as people from all walks of life came together to learn and share. One particularly remarkable discovery came from an elderly woman in Seattle who had worked as Eleanor's assistant in the library for a brief period in the 1960s. She arrived at the Mitchell House carrying a weathered journal that documented Eleanor's system for identifying community needs and orchestrating solutions without drawing attention to individual circumstances. The journal revealed an intricate coding system Eleanor had developed to track her interventions while maintaining absolute discretion. The impact of Eleanor's work continued to ripple outward in unexpected ways. A group of law students from a nearby university began studying her methods as a model for stealth advocacy, the art of achieving justice through careful, behind-the-scenes work rather than confrontational litigation. They saw in Eleanor's approach a powerful alternative to traditional legal advocacy, one that could achieve lasting change while preserving community bonds. Sarah's mother uncovered another cache of documents hidden behind a loose panel in Eleanor's old desk. These papers revealed the full scope of her grandmother's financial acumen, how she had leveraged her knowledge of banking and investment to create opportunities for those who had been systematically excluded from economic advancement. The documents showed how Eleanor had quietly established scholarship funds, business loans, and housing assistance programs, all carefully structured to appear as normal market activities rather than charitable interventions. The garden continued to evolve, much like Eleanor's legacy itself. Sarah added new varieties of flowers alongside her grandmother's original plantings, creating a living metaphor for the way social justice work builds on the foundations laid by previous generations. Visitors to the garden often remarked on its unusual design, how each plant seemed to support and complement its neighbors, creating a harmonious whole that was greater than the sum of its parts. The music box remained Sarah's most treasured possession, its melody now accompanying her own late-night planning sessions as she worked to extend her grandmother's legacy into the future. She had learned to hear new notes in its simple tune, not just the melancholy of secrets kept, but the hope of justice slowly, inexorably unfolding. As winter gave way to spring, Sarah began documenting the practical applications of Eleanor's methods in modern contexts. She worked with community organizations to develop training programs that taught Eleanor's approach to social change, the careful balance of action and discretion, the importance of building trust and maintaining confidentiality, the strategic use of influence to create lasting transformation. The town of Millbrook itself became a case study in sustainable community development. Visitors from around the world came to study how Eleanor's long-term strategy had created a resilient local economy and strong social bonds. They were particularly interested in how her approach had prevented the common pitfalls of gentrification and displacement that often accompanied economic improvement. One day, while sorting through some old photographs, Sarah discovered a series of images that captured Millbrook's evolution over the decades. In each picture, she could now trace the subtle influence of her grandmother's work, the gradual improvement of neighborhoods, the emergence of locally owned businesses, the preservation of historic buildings that might otherwise have been demolished for quick profit. The photographs told a story of change without disruption, progress without destruction. The impact of Eleanor's legacy continued to expand in unexpected directions. A group of environmental activists found inspiration in her patient, systemic approach to change. They began applying her methods to their work, focusing on gradual, strategic interventions that could create lasting environmental improvements without triggering the defensive reactions that often stalled more confrontational approaches. As summer approached, Sarah organized a conference bringing together people from around the world who had been influenced by Eleanor's story. The event, held in the renovated bank building where so much of Eleanor's work had begun, became a celebration of quiet activism and patient change-making. Participants shared their own stories of transformation, each one adding new dimensions to the understanding of how justice could be achieved through careful, persistent action. The music box's melody became the conference's unofficial theme, its gentle notes serving as a reminder that the most powerful changes often come not from dramatic gestures, but from patient, dedicated work. The gathered activists and scholars found in its simple tune a metaphor for their own work, the need to maintain harmony while slowly, inexorably working toward justice. As the conference concluded, Sarah realized that her grandmother's legacy had grown far beyond the boundaries of Millbrook. Eleanor's approach to justice, patient, strategic, and deeply compassionate, had become a model for a new kind of social change, one that recognized the power of quiet persistence over dramatic confrontation. The story that had begun in a dusty attic with an old music box had blossomed into a movement, carrying forward Eleanor's vision of justice achieved through wisdom, patience, and the careful tending of truth's garden. The future stretched out before them, full of possibilities for continuing Eleanor's work in new contexts and new challenges. Sarah knew that somewhere her grandmother was smiling, knowing that her legacy of patient justice would continue to grow and evolve, touching lives in ways she could never have imagined, but had somehow known would be possible if only given enough time to flourish.